Hi everybody. I'm here in the AIDS Memorial Grove in San Francisco's Golden Gate Park. And I've been listening to Eric Weinstein's podcast with Lex Fridman. Some of you might know of it. If you're interested in related topics, it's really interesting. I don't intend to talk a lot about that podcast at the moment, but I do want to sing the praises of one person and those who support her. Her name is Alexandra Elbakyan, if I've got that right. And in the podcast, Weinstein is justifiably singing the praises of a young man who died of despair while he was trying to defeat a kind of evil empire that profits on the research that all of our money, the taxes we pay 3 times over, supports. And Aaron Schwartz is a guy who believed that the results of scientific research should be free to everybody. He got in trouble with the powers that be, powers like JSTOR and Elsevier and other authorities who profit wildly from the redistribution of scientific research, our money paid for. And I found it interesting that while Eric Weinstein was singing Aaron's praises, again justifiably, he didn't sing Alexandra's. Alexandra, in 2011, founded Sci-hub. Sci-hub is a website that has had to evade authoritarian persecution since 2011 and has so far done so relatively successfully. And it makes available instantaneously to anyone with an internet web browser scientific papers that otherwise are secured behind very expensive paywalls. And what that means is that ordinary people can read science. In case you think this isn't important, I want you to look at the situation our nation and all the nations of the world are presently in as regards the relatively confusing crisis that we're facing. And to understand that without education, without intelligence, right, we're going to end up in a society that makes science fiction dystopias look like birthday parties. Now, I'm not trying to claim that science is the answer to all of our problems, or that scientific research always gets it right, or that there aren't dark forces within the bastions of academia or corporate, states like America that have agendas, right? There are, because there are companies like Dow Chemical and Monsanto and Bayer and other companies who are powerful enough to produce and use research for their own ends. And so they can propose via their sort of privatized researchers that glyphosate isn't incredibly toxic or doesn't do genetic damage to human beings and ecologies and things. they can propose that, GMO organisms are the future of feeding humanity, when actually they're the future of feeding the bank accounts of a small amount of tyrannical autocrats and kleptomaniacs. So I just want to take a moment. I'm not even sure, really what I'm going to talk about today. I want to take a moment to celebrate Alexandra and Sci-hub, because she took Aaron's dream and brought it to the next level, and she's a name nearly no one knows. Most of my friends who are in the industry are unaware that, meaning the industry of science, many of them anyway, if not nearly all of them, are unaware that Sci-hub exists. Everybody paid a lot of attention to Aaron, again, justifiably. No problem with Aaron's brilliance and his foresight, his perseverance, the risks he took, the pains he suffered. But Alexandra succeeded and created a method whereby people with access to the data behind paywalls could contribute that data to a public, accessible infrastructure where other people who wanted to read science about anything could retrieve it for free on a moment's notice. And that's, in my view, genius. And I'm not sure why we're not singing Alexandra's praises, or why Eric avoided mentioning her, since he's yelling at Lex about what we need to do to bring prodigy and genius and amazing minds back to life in an academic environment that keeps them chained to paychecks and shit. And it's really interesting because Eric's kind of an angry intellectual genius, and he's not furious, right? He's not up there yelling at Lex, but he is puzzled that Lex isn't upset. And that's reasonable, because people who care about intelligence or the future of life on Earth, or the nature of human prodigy and assembling contexts in which it can emerge and be understood and be celebrated and grow and find purchase and survive, right? Eric wants us to return to something like that. There's all kinds of things I disagree with Eric about. I don't claim to be as smart as him, or to have earned some right to disagree with him or anything like that. In fact, I don't think I need to have those credentials. We can just simply disagree, right? We can have different perspectives. He thinks we need to get off the Earth, for example. I think simultaneously that if there's a way to get to other Earth-like planets, we should be working toward that for sure. But for the moment, there's no nearby Earth-like planets we can get to, and this place is a paradise, and space is catastrophically inhospitable to life, right? You got hard radiation, no resources, projectiles flying around at, thousands of miles per second. It's a bad idea, right? I'm not saying we shouldn't go there. I'm saying the idea that we're going to establish some kind of foothold in the solar system that will allow us to sort of back up the biosphere, in a sense, right? Which is something I truly believe is important. Unfortunately, we've kind of already failed. If you burn down the Amazon rainforests, you've burned the library. If you wipe out the oceans, you've done the modern, absolutely horrific meta equivalent of burning the Library of Alexandria, or burning all the libraries on Earth, right? Because what the humans don't seem to realize is that nature is so explosively intelligent that the biomolecules that you could discover in a square acre of the untouched Amazon rainforest are more advanced than anything our species will ever produce. So if you burn that down, I guess you could understand that as some kind of an opportunity for corporations to sell you really crappy, extremely primitive analogs of what we might otherwise have found there. Yeah. And this is a big part of how Western capitalism works, right? You take something incredibly beautiful and astonishing and prodigious, you wipe that out so people have no access to it, and then you sell them crappy little counterfeit remnants of things that remind them of what you wiped out. Yeah, that's basically how our culture works. And because the people know inside themselves they're carrying forms of prodigy so astonishing that none of the fictions they've ever heard have even hinted at them, and they're hungry for the opportunity to awaken those things within themselves. Nothing in their culture that they will ever encounter will catalyze or celebrate that. In fact, they'll be punished every time they try, and that punishment will start happening in like kindergarten, right? This is how our educational system works. It's not actually an educational system any more than if you took like thousands of birds and started snipping off their wings, telling them that, you know, birds are made for walking. Eventually, when birds no longer see other birds with wings, they'll believe you, right? They'll think, oh, we are creatures of the ground. And if anyone suggests wings to such birds, those people will say like, well, you have a supernatural fantasy, you're insane, right? But actually, human beings are born with an astonishing library of wings inside ourselves. And unfortunately, we encounter cultures that not only despise those wings and tend to attack them, they're desperate to sell us back these sort of broken counterfeits at ever-increasing prices over time. And this unfortunate situation is what the modern generations have inherited from our ancestors. And most of us are extremely confused and relatively helpless, and we have no idea how it is we might remedy this situation, or even if it is remediable. Most of us have never realized we had wings in the first place. So if you don't realize that you're a bird, you're going to be content crawling around on the ground with everybody else that's crawling around on the ground and kind of celebrating it if somebody manages to make a little hop. Right? Now, I hope you'll forgive my wild enthusiasm here. But crisis is one of the catalysts that can occasionally, under some circumstances, cause people to remember some of the astonishing faculties, abilities, histories, and relationships that comprise the noblest aspects of our human interiority. And I have never forgotten the thirst that I knew as a child for genius and prodigy. I have never forgotten the visions I was endowed with by authors, women and men, and sometimes even children, who showed me a world that was at once familiar and beyond the entirety of my common experience. And I, as a youth, also felt that it was at least conceivable that somewhere near at hand I might encounter actually intelligent other beings. Hopefully human beings, but possibly beings from either another world or maybe even another dimension, right? Because as a reader of science fiction, One of the common tropes is that something happens, something unexpected, and the humans are suddenly in relation with an advanced intelligence of a form unfamiliar to us. I think the capacity for that encounter is much closer at hand than we could possibly imagine. In fact, it's so close at hand, unless we're very lucky or very diligent, we'll never discover it. It's actually in our hands. And I don't mean that metaphorically. I mean something like your hand is the sign, the existence of your hands is the sign that that relationship is already going on. But I don't expect people to discover that. That's a bridge too far for nearly everyone I've ever encountered. And even when I first began to understand it, it was, a bit hard to swallow, so to speak. But the highly advanced intelligences that we might hope to meet in space, or that we might consider to exist possibly in some other dimension, or accessibly near to us, are still interesting to me. Those are real possibilities. However, the history of anomalism and the topics that we point toward with ideas about aliens and UFOs and things like this, those topics are very, very complex, and they have, I believe, a lot to do with things that are distinct from the direction that I'm wanting to travel here. In other words, they may not have to do with our capacity to encounter non-human intelligence. They may have to do with other mysterious things that we don't yet have categories or language about. They may even have to do with the nature of our minds, or perhaps our activity in the biosphere, which is, it should be clear, is omnicidal. It kills everything. I heard someone say the other day, our species is a predator. We're not a predator, we're an omnicides. We kill everything. It's not about preying on stuff. We just kill things for convenience, or because if stuff stops moving, we feel safer, or something like this, which is not only abjectly insane and unsurvivable, it very rapidly feeds back into the origins of our own consciousness and intelligence with catastrophic results. So as our species is wiping out the anciently conserved biomes of Earth, our capacity for intelligence is plummeting catastrophically. Now, there might be one or two, there might be some small group of individuals who can resist that free fall to some degree, or maybe even recover their wings because they're falling in that way. But most of us probably won't. So one of the places where we can directly encounter intelligences so astonishing and ancient, profound and profuse, that they exceed the sum of everything we've ever thought or written as a species, is in the living beings that we are still lucky enough to exist in relationship with. Without needing to explain in detail, I want to communicate to you my own sense, and I'm not trying to convince you or ask you to believe me, or, if you're curious, go and look on your own. And I think you'll find that what I'm talking about will have proven to be an understatement. But the living beings that we are surrounded with, these redwood trees, the birds you can hear in the background, the beehives, the ants, the whales and dolphins, the octopi, the cuttlefish, the sparrow, the hummingbird, the bat, the badger, the bear, the beaver, the giraffe, the rhinoceros, the lion, the tiger, the wolf, the coyote, the raccoon, the opossum, the mouse. These creatures are not intelligent in the highly limited capacities we're used to recognizing and relating with directly. They are not intelligent in the way that we have, for example, at least I think they're not. Maybe they are, and I've overlooked it, by the way. There are some people who've suggested this. They're not formally representational cognitives. They don't use tokens to refer to things, and they don't use regularized verbal language. Yet they are exemplars of forms of intelligence that our human conceptual intelligence has been too fucking timid to imagine, let alone recognize. Okay? And if Eric wants something to be pissed about, Weinstein, he wants to be angry about something, he should be angry about that, right? We're living on a world surrounded by intelligences that exceed the wildest speculations of our most brilliant authors, and we're busy kind of, rubbing our chin, going like, where are all the smart things? If you were to take the atomic activities of one of your animal cells, let's say an epithelial cell from your lungs, for example, and just examine that activity over the course of a second, and you were to try with all your might to simulate all of the intelligence of the activities of that cell as it interacts with the rest of your body and the universe and the history of life on Earth and the proteins and the enzymes and the things that the humans have named with scientific, with biological research. What you'd find is that the activity of a single cell over 1 second is incomputable. The entire history of human computation would be some unimaginably minute fraction of what a cell is doing, not just in a second, in a thousandth of a second, right? Just one cell, okay? And your own body is, at present estimates, about 40 trillion cells. And within those cells there are organelles, and within those, there are mitochondria, there's like all kinds of fancy protein production going on. Our cells are doing miracles that our seemingly advanced technology is nowhere near understanding. So we're made, we're actually made of the intelligences that wildly exceed the things we would hope to meet in outer space. And the living world around us is an embodiment of the relationships between these intelligences. Our people, in our rush toward technological ascendancy, have overlooked something that no technology will ever come near to approaching. And we have overstood life. And that is a tragedy we must resolve together. We must cease to overstand the living places, the living beings, the history and purposive character of life on Earth. And there are portals and purposes that make that mission accessible, compelling, and productive in exactly the ways that we're starving for inside, in exactly the ways that that hunger makes us vulnerable to predators who want to sell us counterfeits of this. Right? I'm not angry in the same way Eric is angry or about the same things. And I'd be shocked if he were to listen to my little tirade and find anything interesting about it at all. He'd probably just dare me to show him what I meant. But his capacity to form that question and present it to me is the evidence that answers his challenge. We presume that our distant ancestors were ignorant and superstitious because they didn't have science and they didn't build machines. And certainly when, Spanish warships showed up somewhere in, South America or America and disembarked soldiers with armor, and weapons and horses and stuff, not to mention diseases, plagues, the indigenous peoples there were decimated. Their ways of knowing were obliterated by the forceful incursion of the colonists. But it is naive. It's unforgivably naive to suppose that that means that the tribal and indigenous ancestors who we must all trace our lineages to if we are to believe the stories suggested by Darwinian evolution, and then at some point we were animals. At some point we were all without technology as we understand it. And to suggest that the knowledge of those peoples is all superstition and make-believe is provably wrong and dangerously insane. Now, I'm not suggesting that we return, that we go back in time and try to become like our ancestors. What I'm suggesting is that there's a manifold of living intelligences on Earth that our ancestors were familiar with. They knew it intimately, the way we intimately know our relationship with the light of the sun or oxygen or water. And we can recover those relationships, and we should. I'd say we must. Although, I'm not trying to command anyone to do anything. But no matter what may come in the future, we should be willing as people, as individuals and groups, to say we've had enough of having our wings clipped off in childhood and being sold chains in answer to the hunger in our hearts for flight. Instead, we must recover together the capacity to recognize and celebrate the essential interiority of our humanity, with all of its faculties and intelligence, with all of its nobility and awesome scope and origin. And we should do this with both urgency and humility. For the gifts we carry were not established by ourselves. They were established in relation with the living places of which we are expressions. If we cannot understand that, our capacity for understanding has been largely silenced. So I am hopeful, having had direct experiences of the things of which I speak, that obliterated my wildest hopes and imaginings, I am hopeful that someday we may learn to establish context, even if it's only 4 or 5 of us, and maybe that's exactly how it starts, with a tiny little group, tightly knit, curious, impassioned, capable, skillful, intelligent. In the shape of our hands, there is a secret, right? Each of the members is unique, and they're joined together by a unifying body, the palm. Your own body is not dissimilar. You have 5 appendages joined together by a unifying body. Each of your arms and legs has 3, segments. And they end in stars. Your head has 2 segments. This structure is an analogy of a method that could take us not merely to the stars, but to the origins of our own minds and potential for intelligence. And that is my hope, and that is my dream. And today, and for some time now, that has been my mission. To try to return to common human experience, the unimaginable prodigy, intelligence and abilities that are natural to our humanity. I think it's time our species stopped pretending that crippled crawling was flight and actually had some direct experience of taking to the air again, together, with and for each other, and the history of life on Earth. Thank you for joining me. May we return to the skies of the origins of our minds together. Bye-bye for now.